Hello everyone, my name is Chi. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing, telling, letting you know my favorite books of 2024, the best books I read in 2024. Mind you, all of these books, save for like two, I read not only in the second half of the year, but like the last 3 months of the year. I was having the most 3-star reading year of my entire life. And keep in mind, lots of things happened last year. I was busy traveling other countries. I was in Nigeria for a part of it, bachelorette, all kinds of things. So I was not reading, and yeah, that's just an excuse because you could definitely be doing all these things, but I was not reading as much. I only read 75 books last year, which is my first year in a long time not hitting 100 books. But you know, whatever, things happen. We moved this year back to 100 books, but these are my favorite books, the best books I read in 2024. We're gonna start off with a shocker. It's not that much of a shocker if I'm being completely, yes it is a shocker actually, because it's a thriller, and I did not think I was a thriller girl, but I am actually a thriller girl. So that is The Last Flight by Julie Clark. This book snuck up on me because I've had it for so long, and the reason I haven't read it, I think I said it in the whatever video I put this on my TBR, I think it was like September. I said that I haven't read it because I stay like flying for like work and for just see family and all kinds of things, so I never want to read this because I'm always like a week or two till I have a flight, and for some reason I thought it was about like a plane crash, and low-key it is, but that's not a spoiler, right? Yeah, it's not a spoiler. So basically this book is a thriller, and I gave it 5 stars. There is a little thing that I have, like after I finished reading this book, I initially gave it 4 stars because there's this thing, and I'm gonna make a whole video about it, about this trope that is in so many thrillers that I read that I absolutely despise, and this book has it. But when I think about my entire reading experience and just like what I liked about this book, I absolutely adore this book. So this book is about a woman. Her name is Claire. Her name is Claire, and Claire is in a political marriage, not political marriage, she's in a marriage with a politician, and he is abusive. She is not having a good time. This was supposed to be like the relationship that she always dreamed of, but now she is stuck in this abusive relationship, in this abusive political marriage that she cannot get out of because her husband is beloved by the world. He's like philanthropic. He's one of those politicians that people think like you can do no wrong. The people love him. So since the people love him, she can't come out and say this man is abusive to me because everyone's gonna be like, oh, you just want to check, oh, you just want to bring him down, all of these things. So she devises a plan to escape, and this plan ends up going awry the day before. Her husband actually somehow is able to like unknowingly intercept her plans, so she doesn't know what to do. Here comes in, what is her name? Eva. She meets Eva at the airport where she is meant to get on the plane to finally have her escape. And Eva convinces her, tells her of her story and how she also needs to escape. So they kind of mutually, but if you read it, it's not really too mutual, come to this agreement to switch places. So the plane ride that Claire is supposed to get on, Eva gets on, and Claire does not get on, and Claire assumes Eva's identity, so to speak. Really just going to her apartment, really just kind of assuming, not really her identity because she doesn't pretend to be Eva, but kind of assuming the life and trying to build a life while she is kind of sitting on top of Eva's life. Well, the plane ride that Claire is supposed to be on, where Eva is actually on, crashes. So now everyone thinks that Claire is actually dead, which is actually to the best for her circumstance, but also she feels bad because this girl who she randomly met at an airport, switched places with her because they're both trying to escape like really horrible life situations, has now died in her stead. But she thinks that's so sad, but best case scenario for me, not everyone thinks I'm dead, except, do they? That's pretty much the book, and you just follow the lives. It's told in dual timelines, and I used to think that I hated dual timelines. I still think I do. Sometimes it's not done right. A lot of times it's not done right, but this is done so well. So you see the background of Eva's life and why Eva actually wants to escape. Eva's not the wife of the politician. Eva's the girl who switches last minute. So Eva is the girl who dies at the plane crash, so not the wife of the politician. So you see Eva's life and how it unfolded for her to come to this place where she is now at the airport, wanting to switch lives with this random stranger, and you also see Claire's aftermath. So you're kind of going in 3 different timelines. It's going with the timeline before, how we get to know Eva and how she ended up to be in this place where she wants to switch places with this random stranger, and then you also getting the post of the switch and how Claire is trying to kind of assume a new life after she has switched lives with the stranger. And this is so good. It's so brilliant. I will say the prose, and I have a bit of like, I'm iffy about the prose. So the prose is told it's very easy read. It's a very easy, very I almost want to say monotonous, but I don't want that to be like a ding on this. It's a very easy read, very non-flowery prose. Like there's not a lot of description. There's not a lot of kind of like expository outside of the actual lives of the characters. It's very much not focused on the prose, very much focused on just building the day-to-day and putting you in the shoes the day-to-day of these two characters. It was brilliant. This was an amazing thriller. I do not know how I let it sit for so long. This is a 5-star read. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a very, very easy read, very, very quick read, and it's completely engrossing. And yeah, it's amazing. I absolutely love this book. This is my favorite book. I think I read it in November, but it was my favorite thriller of the year. The next book, I'm pretty sure I read it either in December or November, but that is A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. This is a romance between a prince and his bodyguard. This book came at the perfect time last year. I had given up on the whole entire romance genre, and I am a romance girly. That is my bread and butter. That's where I come from. That's where I like to stay. I love me a good romance. And the romances I read last year were just disappointing me one after the other. This one came at the perfect time. And this one, I feel like with the current like zeitgeist of like Goodreads and the romantasy and book talk, would love to categorize this as a fantasy romance. But I kind of want to, it's definitely a fantasy because it's in a fantastical world, but this is very much a romance book with a fantastical subplot. And the subplot definitely kind of takes the back burner on the romance like halfway through. But this book has one of my favorite scenes in a fantasy book ever. Let me tell you about what this book is about. So this book is about a prince. So the prince has to get a new bodyguard. He is in a situation in which his sister, who is the sultan, who is kind of like the emperor, who is the highest, she says like, okay, it's either you get exiled or you get a new bodyguard. So she gets this bodyguard, and this is the bodyguard. His bodyguard really thinks very lowly of him because the prince suffers from panic attacks and anxiety disorder. So because of that, the bodyguard, who has been raised to think that the prince and the elite are kind of this high entities, these above human entities, these people who are kind of larger than life, just starts to look down on the prince, because not only because of the incident that led him to be the bodyguard, but also because the prince does not exhibit what he has been told and what he has seen to be what royalty should be. So because of that, he has a very low opinion of the prince. But as things kind of unfold, there is a counterfeiting plot that's going on underneath the kind of royal family. So basically they need to find out who is counterfeiting their money, because if they're counterfeiting their money, they're losing legitimacy in their currency, and they are kind of like the highest legitimacy when it comes to currency. People use their currency as the basis for trade. If their currency starts to lose legitimacy because of the counterfeit, their whole life, their whole country can start to fall. So that is kind of the undercurrent, and they find out that there may or may not be a traitor among their midst that's doing this counterfeiting. So that is the underlying plot, and as they try to unfold that plot and find out who is behind this, the bodyguard starts to see the prince in a new light, starts to see like outside of the kind of panic attack, the anxiety disorder, the kind of meek, kind of shy prince, there is someone who is very calculating, there's someone who is very much ready to do whatever it takes for his country, and thus a romance blooms. And this romance was so well done. We have lost as a people, as readers, the art of the slow burn, the art of the actual building of a romance. There was nothing here that the author kind of wanted us to believe that there is a romance or believe that there's a reason for this romance to be without actually showing us. It was very much a show and not telling, which I love. I feel like I've read a lot of romances that there's been an underlying, what is that, pining for years, and you're supposed to just believe the romance on page one. You're supposed to just understand that these people are in love. You're supposed to understand that these people have chemistry that's undeniable without actually showing this, because it didn't start off not enemies to lovers. It started off as just kind of like a strangers to kind of like getting to know each other. You feel it build, and it builds so strong, and you can really feel and be invested in the actual romance of these two characters more than any other romance that I read this year. It was so good. There was just so much angst. There was so much character development. There was so much character change. There was everything that I needed in a romance that I was not getting was in this book, and the fantasy subplot just was there to strengthen the romance, which I actually really enjoy, because I feel like lately in the romantasy books I've been reading, or fantasy romance books, I've been reading one plot, one always suffers, but I think this book was very intentional, a romance that is set in a fantasy setting with the plot of the fantasy being to push the romance, and it did it impeccably. I was able to be invested in the fantasy story and the romance as two separate entities, as well as the fantasy story as a means to push the romance, and it was done wonderfully, beautifully. No qualms, 5 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for a good romance, it is A Taste of Gold and Iron. The next book, because I really wanted to include a YA book, and I gave this 4 stars. So not all these are 5 stars, but I really want to include a YA book because this is one of the best YA books I have read in a long time, and it's called What We Harvest by Anne Frastat. It's a YA horror book. So basically it is about a girl who lives in a town in which there are entities that are now wreaking havoc on the town that are making people turn into zombies. So basically there's a lot of restrictions on what they can eat, where they can travel, they can't go out at night because at night they are vulnerable to this kind of zombie entity that is in the food, and that is in the air. So if you come in close proximity with one of these zombies, then you can then become a zombie and they go into the forest and then they come out at night to make more zombies. At the start of the book, we find her at her farm and her parents are not there and it's past curfew. So it's past the time that you're supposed to be in the house if you don't want to become a zombie. She's just like, where are my parents? I'm not trying to get them. I don't want them to become zombies. She doesn't know what to do. Her ex-boyfriend, as we learn, of course, because it's a YA book, he is somewhere in the vicinity. So she's just like, I gotta go see if my parents are at these other people's houses that they went to go visit. So they drive, it's already past curfew, they're not supposed to be driving, and then they encounter these zombies. And they go on this journey to find out what is actually causing these zombies, how it's related to each of their families, because this town is kind of run by 4 families who have control over certain industries. So her family has control over certain crops, his family over certain animals, things of that nature, and how they are actually related to what is turning their families into zombies, and whether or not they can actually stop it before it turns the whole town to zombies, before the government quarantines them, all of that. This is a great YA horror book. Like, it's just impeccably done, and I feel like the YA books I've been reading have kind of, I don't want to say they've lowered my opinion of YA, but they've been reading a lot like middle grade lately. I feel like I read a lot of YA that I'm just like, the plot is very simplistic. There's some type of random insta-love romance that didn't need to be there. Nothing is really delving into these characters, and it seems like a kind of insult to young adult, like the age category, because not only for young adults who are reading this, who want kind of like a more engaging story, but just to the genre in general for other people who are reading young adult, who are not young adults, to think that young adult, wow, how many times have I said young adult? To think that this is kind of how young adult books are, but they're not. They can be really intricate. This plot is very, very intricate. It goes into kind of like the history of the families. It goes into the science of how these entities that are turning the townsfolk into zombies, how that works. It goes into the relations between the main girl and the main guy and their families. It delves deep into all aspects of kind of this book, which I feel like has been lacking in a lot of young adult books I read. So this is a great book. If you're looking for fantasy horror, the relationship between the main guy and the main girl is just, it feels so real. Like, the decisions they make are not childish. They're childish because they're children, but not childish because, like, oh, this is an adult writing books about children who has, like, not been a child for a minute. The ending of this, everything about this was great. This is a 4-star book. Really, really enjoyed it. 4.5 stars. This book, 5 stars. I was reading it and I always say that there's 2 types of books you can read. There's books that you want to finish quickly, books that you like, good books that you're reading, so books that you actually like. There's books that you want to finish quickly because you want to get to the end and you want to know what happens, and like, you just like, I feel like thrillers are like that, fast paced, where you feel like everything is leading up to this penultimate moment. And then there are books that you don't want to end. Like, you are just enjoying being in the book, every chapter, the characters. And this, The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon, is one of those books. This again is a romance book with a fantasy subplot. This book, I really thought this book was going to be my favorite book of the year, but this is a runner-up. I should do this in first, second, and third place, but this is second place. I'm gonna show third place after this, and then number 1. But this is second place. This is a romance with, I don't even want to say a fantasy subplot. This is a romance set in a fantastical world. There is a slight fantasy subplot, but it's mainly focused on the romance between this guy, Hart, and this girl, Mercy. Mercy is the main girl, and she is the equivalent of an undertaker. So people die, and she kind of dresses them up, makes them look how they're supposed to look when they go to the funeral for their families. That's what she does. And Hart brings her people. So his job is to kind of be not a police force, but a tangential police force for entities that are taken over by another evil entity or another fantastical entity, and then are just wreaking havoc and trying to kill other people. So he's supposed to save their souls, get in their bodies, and bring them to Mercy. These 2 hate each other for circumstances that are kind of like miscommunication, but also like, it was just hate at first sight. These 2 hate each other. So they hate whenever they have to like encounter each other, but there's like obviously like some underlying attraction between those 2. So Hart is a demigod, and people can tell he's a demigod because he has gray eyes, and demigods are not in society very positive positively viewed. Like, people don't genuinely like demigods, so he's very, very isolated. He had a father figure, or he was raised by a single mother. His mother passed. He's never known his real dad, but he has resentment towards his real dad because he left his mom and him without obviously a father figure and someone to kind of like help out. So his mom had a really hard time bringing him up by herself, and he also doesn't know who he is. So he knows he's a demigod, but he doesn't know who his father is, who made him a demigod, a half god, half human. So now he also doesn't know whether or not he's immortal. He doesn't know if he is a ticking time bomb not a ticking time bomb, because he doesn't know if he's human, just like gonna die like the rest of us, or if he's immortal. And that is very isolating to him because he doesn't want to build relationships and friendships with people knowing that he could watch them die, but he also doesn't know whether or not that's his reality. So that's hard. He is very lonely. So because he's very lonely, he just decides one day, I'm just gonna write a letter. I'm gonna write a letter, send it out into the ether, just kind of telling how life is going. Like, he's lost his other father figure a long time ago. He never gotten over that. He lost his dog. His best friends have been alienated from him for a recent time, so he's extremely lonely and he feels just at a loss. So he just writes a letter detailing how he's currently feeling, and that letter makes its way over to Mercy. He doesn't sign it who he is, so it's kind of anonymous pen pal, and Mercy writes back. So they become anonymous pen pals, and then they start to develop a friendship and things get deeper, but they don't know who each other is and who they're writing to, things of that nature. This was so well done. This book was so impeccably done. And not only that, this book has one, if not my favorite scene in a book I've ever seen ever. Like, I don't want to spoil it, but it's this specific scene where you get more of a background onto Hart and kind of where he comes from and like who his parents are and how that everything unfolds. And it is just such a brilliantly, beautifully done scene that I just read. It's one of those scenes that I finished reading the scene, I flipped right back to it. I flipped right back and reread it again. It was just so amazingly done. The interpersonal relations between the characters is also a big point. You get a lot about Mercy, because Mercy right now, she's not really doing what she wants to do. Her family owns the Undertaking business, and she is substituting for her brother, who is in college, until he comes back and can take over the business, because the business is, whatever her last name is, Anne's sons. But she sees her sister getting pregnant, she sees her friends getting married, and she's just there because her father is sick and he cannot do all these duties. So you see the interpersonal relationships between Mercy and her family, as well as between Hart and his past, and Hart and with his like friends and his co-workers. And there's so many characters that are just absolutely amazing, absolutely so enduring, just such a feel-good, delicious book. I don't know how else to describe it. I enjoy this book so much. My third favorite book is Song of Blood and Stone by L. Penelope. This book I also just finished in December. It is a fantasy book by a Black woman about this girl. She is mixed race. She's half Black, half white in this world. And in this world, the Black people, they have magic. So they have a magic system. They have a song, is what it's called, and their song just has magical properties, from when it comes to healing, from when it comes to seeing things, moving yourself, all kinds of things. The Elsiras, they do not like the Lagamar people. So the Lagamar people are the Black people with magic. The Elsiras are the white people without magic. So the Elsiras, they don't have magic, but they think the whole magic is witchcraft. So basically, the basis of the hatred, there's a beef between the two, is just racism and magic, basically. They don't like Black people, and they don't like that the Black people got magic. She doesn't have a family. Her mom, her dad, her brothers have all passed away, and she is kind of in this battle to keep her house. She doesn't really have a way of paying for it, so she is kind of in a battle to be foreclosed. This Elsiran guy shows up, and he has been taken hostage, and she has to offer reprieve to the soldiers who have taken her hostage by kind of like decree of like Lagamar. She offers them her home for them to stay in, and then she starts talking to the Elsiran man. He is very nice. He saves her from being kind of assaulted from the soldier man, and he doesn't believe her when she says she has magic, because he believes that he is on the Elsiran side of kind of the veil. The veil is basically what separates the two places. So he thinks he's still on the Elsiran side, and she's like, no, I'm Lagamari. You are on the Lagamari side. So you have passed over the veil, and I have magic. So because of that, it kind of sets a series of events in motion about the veil that is crumbling now between the two, the refugee crisis between the Lagamar going to the Elsiran side. This was just high fantasy goodness, and the romance was definitely a subplot. As opposed to the other two fantasies I showed, it was definitely fantasy or romance with a fantasy subplot. This is definitely more focused on the fantasy. It's focused on the race relations between the Elsiran and the Lagamar people, and the battle between the refugees coming from the Lagamar side. So the veil is called the mantle. The mantle is breaking, and the father is going to come back, basically. And the father is basically the scary entity that the people of Elsira kind of revere in high esteem. But the people of Lagamar know that the father is like not not good. Like, he's evil. Like, we don't want him to come back. So she's kind of at the center because she is one of the few people, like Amari people with magic, that can actually see into the past and see kind of who the true father is, where his magic comes from, and what they need to do to either strengthen the veil or prevent kind of other destruction by the father. Very, very complicated, but this book really affirmed to me that I gotta read more Black women. Of the way that the author built this fantasy world. This fantasy world very much is fantastical, but mirrors so much of current society that it feels so relatable, and it feels like the interactions between the Lagamari and the Elsyrian people, the way people look at her, the kind of decisions, the machinations that the people make when it comes to the Lagamari people, when it comes to the refugees, when it comes to her just being someone who is now in high society in Elsyria, when it comes to just people being afraid of the magic, when the magic can do so much, the magic can heal people, the magic can just help so much, but people are just afraid of it because it comes from the Black people. The way the author built this fantasy world was just amazing. It was just everything I ever wanted in a fantasy world. And usually I'm very skeptical when authors use kind of just like racism as the basis of kind of the conflict in their fantasy world. It seems very cheap, it seems very easy, and it seems like a way to kind of like exploit what's currently going on in the world as a way for your world building. But because this is coming from a Black woman, you can tell that the way she created the relations between the Elsyr and the Lagamari people, it felt deeper, it felt more meaningful. It felt like you can actually see such mirrors within current society between what is going on, and then the romance was just kind of like sprinkled on top. But it was brilliant. It was so good. I have not read, I feel like, a high fantasy that I enjoyed as much as this in so long. But the world building in this, the settings, the characters, everything about this book was just impeccable. Even the interpersonal relations with this girl and kind of her upbringing and like the two sides of where she comes from was just so brilliantly done. I adored it. This was my third favorite book of the year. And now to the number one. I have a new favorite book of all time. And let me sit down for a second. I'm already sitting, but as a reader, I feel like that is a big deal, because my favorite book, if someone asks me what my favorite book is, it's still a book that I read when I was 17 years old, and that book kind of changed my life in that time, and I'll still say it like 10 years later that this is my favorite book. Because it's just so hard to assign. There's so much things that have to go right with a book to be a new favorite book. The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson is my new favorite book of all time. And when I tell you, I think if you are an OG Chibi reading, you know when I got this book. You know when I got it in the original cover, hated the original cover. Then my partner got me this book because I think it was only available like in the UK. And it's just like black, but there's just like a Black woman on the front, and then it has purple itch, and it's a sci-fi book. I had it displayed in my before I moved in my room, displayed without ever reading it. Like, that's how much I was obsessed with just like the premise and the cover without having read this book. Had it 2 years, haven't read it. And I was like, there's no way I'm gonna bring this book into 2025 without reading it. And I read it, and it's my new favorite book. Let me set the scene for you. This girl, what's her name? Kara. Kara is a girl who comes from the equivalent of just like kind of the hood, and she wants to escape and go into kind of the upper echelon of the city. So in order to do that, she becomes someone who is able to jump dimensions. In this world, there's a knowledge that there's an infinitesimal amount of dimensions, and she is able to kind of jump and do certain tasks within these other dimensions for the company that she works for. Everyone also has a doppelganger. So these kind of dimensions are mirrors of the current dimension, basically. Every person you could have ever been, it's kind of just mirrored in all of these dimensions. So she exists, and everyone in the town or the world that she lives in exists in these other dimensions. She finds out that she only exists in 8 other dimensions. So let's say there's about, I think, over 300 dimensions that they have found here, 300 worlds, 300 multiverses that she has found, and she's only alive in 8 of them. And she's like, that's kind of peculiar. That's very, very weird. So she sent on one of these trips, one of these tasks to one of the dimensions where she was just killed. She finds out that actually she is still alive, and also finds out the plot of kind of like what's going on in that world. That sends her into kind of a existential crisis on like what she should do and whether she should like kind of investigate why she's being killed in all these dimensions, and then brings her back to kind of the job that she's doing and why she was chosen for this job and why she's being killed off, if she's being killed off, because she's being murdered in all of these dimensions, and murdered by usually the same person or usually within the same circumstances. So it kind of brings her into a larger plot on these multiverses in general and her jumping in general. that I feel like is a synopsis that does not do this book justice. But just know it is the perfect sci-fi book. It is the perfect sci-fi book. We have a flawed main character, but a flawed main character who you can relate to. A flawed main character who every single flawed decision she makes, you're like, I wouldn't do that, but I can see why you can do that. Or if you're me, I'd be like, I do the same thing. I would do the exact same thing. And just the way that like she is very focused on the upward mobility and escaping kind of where she comes from is just very relatable. Seeing it written on the page, it makes it seem like, okay, girl, it's the very, what is that? The hackneyed kind of trend that like you should always, you know, don't forget where you come from, be respectful of where you come from. But you can really see it written on page why she would want to leave and why she's kind of holding this other city, this other town, these other people in higher esteem than the place that she comes from, even though these people look down on her as well as from the place that she comes from. I feel like the character is so relatable, her decisions are so relatable, but she's not a perfect main character in any way, shape, or form. She's very much flawed. Her decisions that she makes are very much selfish at times, but you can see where that selfishness comes from. She very much has like, it's me or anybody else, it's me or the world, and how you can see how that also shifts as time goes on. And the plot that is on top like when I tell you there is 5 different layers of the plot that unfolds. We meet characters in one dimension and they contradict each other in different dimensions, and how she is able to relate to them and how it relates to the kind of bigger plot from the world that she comes from. This book, my favorite genre has always been science fiction. This book did it so well. I love when when the author is able to put a black character in a book and make them still very much read black. They're not just reading as a colorless character. The decisions, the way she speaks, the way she interacts, the way she sees where she comes from, the way she sees other people, everything about her is just very much a black woman who is in this sci-fi world. And the world that she has built, Micaiah Johnson has built, very much is a sci-fi world that could exist on top of our current world, which makes it so much more interesting because you can see how this could unfold in the real world. It's interesting how I had that perspective because obviously this is the book about multiverses. Like this is a book that's extremely fantastical in that sense, but you can still see that if this was a world that was kind of on top of our current world, I can see how the same plot could take place and how would I make these same decisions that the main character here makes. It is brilliant. It is amazing. This is my new favorite book. I love The Space Between. I also, because I rushed and put all the books I read in 2024 into my Goodreads literally last night to make sure that I made it to my Goodreads goal of 75. There's a sequel that came out last year and I heard nothing about it. I have been so divorced from the book diverse, but I'm going to get it and I am going to read it because this is my new favorite book of all time. And that are my best books of 2024. The last 3 months of my 2024 literally made up for the amount of 3 stars I got for the rest of the year. Because I'm telling you, those are the only books I have above a 4-star, 4.5 to 5. Everything else was a 3-star. Let me know if any of these, you've read any of these books, if you think they're as good as I thought they were. And if you don't, you're wrong. Just kidding. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.